Welcome everyone to another Conversations in the Void. I am your host, Graveyard, joined as always with my off-screen producer, Salem. Make sure to say hi to Salem in the chat. He loves to hear from each and every one of you. So tonight's episode is a little bit earlier than normal, but we have a great guest for you tonight. Veteran film and TV director, producer, screenwriter, author, journalist, educator with works including Elvira's Haunted Hills, Gods and Monsters, and I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter. Please welcome to the Void, Sam Irvin.
Hey, here we go. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
How
are you doing tonight? Or late afternoon for you?
Yes, I'm doing very, very well. Yes, I'm in the Los Angeles area, in Horrorwood, California.
There you go. All right, so Sam, before we get into the bulk of who you are, let's talk a little bit about you. So, do you know what really brought you into the world of directing, movie making, and all that jazz?
Yes, I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina. My dad owned movie theaters, and at the age of 5, at his theater, I saw in 1961. Yeah, that's how old I am. I saw The Pit and the Pendulum, the Vincent Price, Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movie during its first run. And it completely changed my life, blew me away. I fell in love with Vincent Price, Corman, Poe, horror, everything. And the other film that was seminal in those days was Bride of Frankenstein, which I saw in the afternoon on TV, on Shock Theater. All those great Universal classics were being shown in that syndicated Shock package. And I just became your typical 1960s monster kid with Famous Monsters of Filmland and the Aurora model kits and you name it. It was, I had it all. I was the cliche. And when I was 8 years old in 1964, my dad took our family on a cross-country road trip to see all the sights out west, like the Grand Canyon and Las Vegas and Disneyland. But he got us a VIP tour at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, and I walked onto the set of The Great Race. It was a big, huge Blake Edwards production, and they were shooting, a little scene with an iceberg and a huge tank of water, antique cars on the iceberg, all the stars, Natalie Wood, Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, Peter Falk, they're all there. Wave machines, snow machines, just everything. And eyes just popped right out of my head. I thought up to that moment, if they were going to shoot a scene like that, they'd have to go find a real iceberg in the North Pole and wait for a storm. And I had no idea that this could be created. So my dad had an 8mm home movie camera. I literally just took it right out of his hand and never gave it back and started making my own films. And eventually with my little brother playing Dracula with a black beach towel for a cape and plastic fangs and ketchup and the whole thing. But I just was absolutely obsessed with movies, and I could see them many times over at my dad's theaters. This was long before home video, before people could really do that. I was very, very spoiled and lucky as a kid. When I was a teenager, I started a fanzine on horror films called Bizarre. This was the 4th issue where I put Frankenstein: The True Story on the cover.
Nice.
This is in 1974 when I was like 17. And as a high school graduation present, I got my parents to send me to London so I could interview in person all of my Hammer film idols and everybody. And I ended up and it was so successful that I went back. I convinced them to send me back the next summer. So there were 2 summers in a row where I ended up interviewing 35 horror horror royalty, from Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Vincent Price, Diana Rigg, Donald Pleasance. I mean, you name it. All directors like Terrence Fisher, the great Hammer film director, Freddie Francis, and on and on and on. And I collected just recently all of those 35 interviews in a book because I think they're the most incredible time capsules. Because I was interviewing when they were still at the height of their careers, in the middle of doing these things, not 20 years later,
right?
Nice, embellished stories. These were unfiltered. And I've collected them in this book, I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter, How I Met Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, and I do introductions to each one, talking about how I bamboozled the interviews, and those are really funny. And I had to kind of set up my childhood as a monster kid, a closeted gay monster kid, and and it sort of became sort of half of a coming of age memoir, along with this incredible collection of interviews. And I got Elvira, Cassandra
Mhm.
Peter, do the forward. She's my buddy. I've known her for 30 years, and I directed Elvira's Haunted Hills. And anyway, it's just a book that I'm really, really proud of. And I ended up winning the Rondo Award for Writer of the Year for it. So there you go.
Wow, that's impressive. I also really love the old Universal horror monster movies. I love all the Hammer horror. I am a
Yes,
big physical media collector. And I collect laser discs. I have all of those on laserdisc.
that's fantastic. That's really great. No, they're absolute cherished films for me. And then when once I've done like 4 issues of my fanzine. They were annual. I did one each summer. They were quite lengthy, huge, a lot of pages, tons of reviews, and all these great interviews and stuff. And
Mhm.
in 1975 was my last issue. And I went to later that year. I went to the famous Monsters of Filmland convention of 1975, where I was Ingrid Pitt's aide de camp for the weekend. Peter Cushing was the major guest star, and Michael Carreras, head of Amber Films, was there. I mean, it was the most incredible thing ever. But that was kind of a turning point for me, because
Mhm.
3 days after that, I had already organized at my college. I went to the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina. I had already organized a little festival of this new director that not too many people were following yet, named Brian De Palma.
Oh man.
And I had seen Sisters and Phantom of the Paradise, and those two films blew me away. And so we booked those for this little festival on campus, and a couple of his earlier films, Hi Mom and Greetings, both of which featured Robert De Niro in his
Mhm.
career. And I got a hold of Brian, just cold called the casting office of Carrie, and they put him on. Um, and convinced him to come out. And so he came out. He said he'd never had anything like this done of him before. So he came out to South Carolina. That's how I met him. And I ended up working with him. I started my first professional job was working as his assistant on The Fury between my junior and senior years of college. They were shooting during the summer in Chicago on location. And then when I went back to school, and then when I was about to graduate at the end of the semester in spring semester of '78, yes, '78, he called me up and he said, "I know you're graduating. Do you want to come up and work on Home Movies, which was this low budget comedy film he was doing with Kirk Douglas and Nancy Allen and Keith
Yeah.
Gordon?" And I said, absolutely. And I took my last exam. I got on the plane. I didn't even go to my graduation ceremony. And I thought I was just going to be his assistant again, like I was on The Fury. And I got off the plane. And he said, "No, you're going to be the associate producer and production manager." And he just like threw me into the deep end to see if I could swim. And apparently I did, because then he hired me full time. And I was sort of, it was a two-person production company of
Mhm.
him and me. And I was like the reader, and I do reader reports and stuff like that, and be basically his assistant, and worked on Dress to Kill and Blowout, and other things that he had in development and stuff. So it was amazing. And even though I had gone to film school at the University of South Carolina, working with De Palma and being on set with him, that was my education, and as a to become a film director. And that's what I was really rabid to do. And
Right.
so once I kind of finished, I sort of made coffee for him long enough, and he had me he had me go off and produce this film for a protege of his called The First Time. Then it was really at that point, I couldn't really go back and be his assistant, and he knew that too. And so I kind of moved on, and I did a short film that got into Sundance, and De Palma let me use his editing room for free and stuff like that. And that led to my first feature film, which was Guilty as Charged, which was a kind of a horror dark comedy with Rod Steiger, who plays a madman who kidnaps murderers and fries them on his own electric chair in his dungeon.
Ooh.
And it also had Zelda Rubinstein from Poltergeist, Heather
Mhm.
Graham, Isaac Hayes, Lauren Hutton, this incredible cast. And we built these beautiful Gothic German expressionistic sets, and it was just a dream come true. And that launched my career as a director. And I've
Mhm.
directed now over 50 films, a lot of them television movies, and done some TV stuff. I did 3 seasons of Dante's Cove, which was a gay horror series. I did, Elvira's Haunted Hills, of course, and I was one of the producers of Gods and Monsters, which I'm very, very proud of, especially because The Bride of Frankenstein is my favorite film of all time. So obviously, I'm a huge fan of James Whale, who was a
Right.
relatively openly gay director, as much as you could be open back in those days. And Gods and Monsters stars Sir Ian McKellen as James Whale. And we even have a flashback on the set of Bride of Frankenstein where we were able to recreate and build our own laboratory, just like the one you see
What?
in the original Frankenstein and Bride of
Yeah.
Frankenstein. And we even got some of the original Kenneth Strickfaden electrical equipment and had authentic, props in there. And Mel Brooks had also gotten it for Young Frankenstein, so
Right.
it had such history to it. So that was really special project for sure.
Yeah. And that's I love hearing the journey like that. I about a year and a half ago I interviewed some independent horror directors, and now I'm part of their group too. I'm part of their indie team, and we're making movies and stuff like that too. So you got your foot in though at a much bigger spot than I did.
No, I feel very lucky. I was so naive as a kid. I just didn't think that there was anything I couldn't do. People say, "Well, you just manifested your way into it," and I'm like, "Not really. I was a stalker." and and that's kind of what it was. I really, really was really lucky. I think I used up all my luck in my now I'm kind of stuck as a TV director of Hallmark Christmas movies and Lifetime thrillers and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But it
Yeah.
would be lovely if I was able to direct my own horror films and build all the sets from the ground up and stuff, which I've only had a few occasions to
Mhm.
be able to do.
Yeah. And because I have the shared love like you do with the older stuff, I wanted to do a decades of horror project. I want to do and build go back to the 1910 and build the rust color set and have it filmed like that, and just do a style of each decade and do 100 years of horror.
That would be so incredible.
That's one of my ultimate goals to start trying to do here, and I just trying to figure out the logistics of doing it. Because
Oh,
like I said, I'm really looking forward to the 30s and 40s because, like I said, the classic Universal monsters.
absolutely. They're my absolute favorites for sure.
Now, why do you think that they've been a mainstay for 90 years now, essentially?
Well, they really launched the whole genre of horror. I mean, they sort of created the whole genre from the ground up. And I mean, when you think of, I mean, even just Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and what James Whale did. First of all, Mary Shelley never even mentioned electricity in the book.
Right.
There was no description of how the creature was brought to life. And all the tropes we have for Frankenstein movies were developed right in those early films that James Whale did at Universal. And, when Frankenstein came out in 1931, that was the same year that Dracula was done. And, these were huge, huge hits and just completely started the whole genre and really defined everything. I mean, and all of the tropes of vampire movies and the tropes of Frankenstein type films were really developed at Universal, much more so
Right.
than in the books originally.
Yeah, and I attribute Jurassic Park existing because of something like Frankenstein, where it's a science experiment gone wrong.
Exactly. No, precisely. And think how many films really fall under that category. And it's really pretty amazing the footprint that they had back in those days. And when you think of Carl Lindley Jr. being head of Universal, how his name is on every single one of those movies, and it just without those, I don't know where we'd be.
Right. Now, with being such a huge fan, do you see any reason why the dark shared universe isn't really picking off currently?
Well, I think when they were trying to tie them all together with the Mummy, and Tom Cruise and everything, I don't think that they really, they were, they didn't know what they wanted to be. I mean, that movie was as much of an action Tom Cruise picture
Mm-hmm.
as it was trying to be a horror film, and I think it just didn't understand, what it was trying to be, and sometimes they just get really overblown. Uh, I thought that Van Helsing had some moments several years earlier, and but it was kind of a little bit of a mishmash and too, overproduced or whatever. And I think that they were much smarter to say, okay, we're not going to try to do a monster universe, and start with the monsteramas like Universal ended up getting to with House of Frankenstein and House of
Right.
Dracula and those, but do individual, stories. However, I mean, I thought Invisible Man was a great movie, but it wasn't, the Claude Rains, James Whale,
Right.
Invisible Man by a long shot. It was a totally modern, completely rebooted, and very imaginatively done and very well, but I can't really put it in the same category of the classics by any means. Now they have Wolfman coming out, and we'll
Yep.
see how that is. But I really love the gothic classic sort of thing. I thought that the Last Voyage of the Demeter, I thought was pretty good. I thought the critics and everybody were a little tough on that film. It's not perfect, but I thought, I mean, one of my favorite films in the early 70s was a film called Horror Express with
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and Telly Savalas, and it's all about this creature that's on a train that's bumping off people and getting on the loose and stuff. And I thought that the Last Voyage of the Demeter was kind of Horror Express on a boat. And
Right.
had that movie been made back in the 70s, I think it would be considered, a pretty groundbreaking classic. And so I'd love to see more films of like that. And really, with Last Voyage of the Demeter, they just took a tiny little slice of the Dracula story, and they didn't try to overblow what the whole, try to do something way too epic. And I like the simplicity of the story too. I think, just choosing a sliver and focusing on that was a smart way to go. Um, so, we'll see. I am
Yeah.
looking forward to Nosferatu. That looks really
Yes.
interesting. The trailer. We'll see. And by the way, I am really looking forward to Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, which
Yeah.
is shooting right now. One of my favorite Frankenstein adaptations was a 1970s two-part NBC film called Frankenstein: The True Story, which was this really great. It was epic. It really was epic, and had an all-star cast from James Mason, David McCallum, Leonard Whiting played the doctor, and Michael Sarrazin played the monster, and Jane Seymour played the female creature, and it also had Agnes Moorehead and Sir Ralph Richardson and Sir John Gielgud and Tom Baker from Doctor Who, everything. And I ended up, I had it on the cover of my fanzine back then because I loved it so much. And
Right.
then years later, Little Shop of Horrors magazine had me do an entire issue
Oh,
devoted to the film. And we have this three
nice.
panel fold out mural and everything. And that led to last year was the 50th anniversary. And I did a book, a little pamphlet. It's only 400 pages and
Jeez.
1,350 photos. Um, and it's called The Epic Saga Behind Frankenstein, the True Story. And the behind the scenes of how this got made is absolutely mind blowing. And I got Anne Rice to write the foreword.
Wow.
It was the film that inspired her to write Interview with the Vampire, and I got
Hmm.
Guillermo del Toro to write the afterword because it's one of his favorite Frankenstein films, and I'm really excited about his film for several reasons. I would be anyway, but this movie really was it was kind of taking the first two James Whale films, Frankenstein
Hmm.
and Bride of Frankenstein, and putting them together into a magnum opus. And that's what the producer of this movie had in mind, Hunt Stromberg Jr. And I mean, talk about a monster kid. He discovered Vampira, created her first hosting show. I mean, he's really the granddaddy of all horror hosts. Um, but he also knew Boris Karloff. His dad had produced two of Karloff's films, including Mask of Fu Manchu, and he grew up knowing all these people. Knew Elsa Lanchester, met her when she was shooting Bride of Frankenstein. She was also shooting a movie that her dad was producing at the same time. I mean, just a crazy monster kid like me. And this was his magnum opus. And he wanted the master villain of it to be Dr. Pretorius from Bride of Frankenstein. And that's really essentially who James Mason is playing in this film. The early drafts of the script for this movie actually
Hmm.
called him Dr. Pretorius. They ended up changing the name to Dr. Polidori, but it really is Pretorius. Well, Guillermo del Toro has a character in his Frankenstein named Dr. Pretorius,
Oh,
by Christoph Waltz. So, um, for anybody who thinks that he's following the Mary Shelley book slavishly, think again. He's very much inspired by the James Whale movies and probably this movie too. One of the unique things about Frankenstein: The True Story was that the monster came out looking beautiful. The gay writers, um, Don Bacardi and his partner Christopher Isherwood. Isherwood wrote the Berlin stories that Cabaret was based on and everything. Major novelist. They injected a lot of queer subtext into this movie, and one of the things was to have the Dr. Frankenstein, be young and beautiful. It was played by 22-year-old Leonard Whiting, who was famous for Romeo in Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet.
mhm.
And he brings to life Michael Sarrazin, who looks beautiful in the beginning, and that had never really been done, and it really added a lot of pathos to the story, because eventually, of course, the creature this is how he comes out looking
Right.
absolutely beautiful, and then as time goes on, his skin starts to deteriorate, and that's when Dr. Frankenstein loses interest in him and abandons him. So, um, but at any rate, Guillermo del Toro has cast Jacob Elordi as the monster. Now, Jacob Elordi played the hottie in Saltburn. He's the hottie on Euphoria. He played Elvis in Priscilla last year, the Sofia Coppola movie. He's a really, really attractive young guy, and he's about 6'6". And so I'm just so curious if he's going to actually go there and have him turn out beautiful in the beginning before he turns into
Mm.
a gnarly Bernie Wrightson looking creature. And Bernie Wrightson, the great artist who illustrated a version of Frankenstein, that's kind of what is inspiring Guillermo. He's basing it a lot on the look of Bernie Wrightson's illustrations. So and then Oscar Isaac is playing Dr. Frankenstein. Mia Goth is playing the bride.
Yep.
It's just going to be, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, it's always interesting because
Yes.
if the Universal monsters kind of ended with the Abbott and Costello world, right? And eventually we got to comedy of it
Yeah,
all.
and Universal. I mean, I love Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I think it's one of the greatest comedies ever. Don't get me wrong, but it just, they once they got to the Monsteramas, where it was all the creatures in House of
Mhm.
Frankenstein, House of Dracula, and then
Yeah.
with Abbott and Costello, they just weren't doing any serious ones anymore, and I really miss that, and I think that they didn't know where to take it at that point, and Universal eventually went even further by creating the Munsters in
Yep.
the '60s, which, by the way, um, the producer of Frankenstein: The True Story, the guy I'm talking about, who discovered vampire and everything else, he was head of programming at CBS, and he greenlit the Munsters and a lot of other shows, The Twilight Zone, Wild Wild West, Alfred Hitchcock, everything. I mean, he has his fingers in so many things, you can't believe it. But the people who did see that there was a need to get back to some serious versions of these films, of course, was Hammer Films. And in
Yep.
1957, started with Curse of Frankenstein, did it in color. Now we get, lots of blood and gore with you see the brain when they're making, when they're doing the surgeries and stuff. And the women are low, low cut, lots of cleavage. It
Yep.
was severe. It had, it was a whole new way of rebooting these films, and then followed by Horror of Dracula, and they made stars of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, and they really hit on what Universal had just wasn't thinking of. And this movie, Frankenstein: The True Story, by the way, is Universal. It was made by Universal in 1973. And the producer went into them and said, hey, Hammer Films has kind of done what you guys should have been doing. And let me do this Frankenstein epic and bring things back to Universal the way they should be. And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, and I always felt like The Shape of Water,
yes,
was like was the Creature from Black Lagoon.
Oh, it absolutely was. And in fact, Guillermo del Toro was talking to Universal about doing Creature from the Black Lagoon as part of their whole dark universe. When all that was happening, and then it all fell apart, and Guillermo just went off and did his own version of it inspired by that. And my God, The Shape of Water is just an absolutely brilliant film. It's so touching and wonderful. So that's really the perfect example of what could be done with these monsters, with the right hands who are fanboys who understand what it is that was so powerful for us. I always felt as a kid, especially as a closeted gay kid growing up, the Frankenstein monster always resonated with me. He was a freak of nature, misunderstood by society. He wasn't a mad killer. He usually killed people out of innocence or self-defense. And I, as a kid, even at the youngest age, before I even knew what gay was, I was identifying with him as an outsider, and I cried. I wasn't really afraid of him. And when you look at those first several films, they all had these innocent kids who weren't afraid of the monster, like little Maria in Frankenstein by the lake, when then they sit down and they're tossing flowers into the water. She's not afraid of them. And then in Son of Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, Basil Rathbone's son, is not afraid of him. The little girl in Frankenstein, what is it, Ghost of Frankenstein or whatever. I mean, they're never afraid of him, and that's the way I was. I was an innocent kid. I felt sorry for him, and I always felt that the doctor was the villain, and he really was the villain for abandoning this creature. Bringing him to life, and then not helping him, and all the creature wanted was to be loved. And wow, I mean, that's a really, really, really powerful. That's a powerful emotion for especially seeing as a young kid.
Right. Yeah, and it all makes perfect sense. Where I want to see these movies go in today's age is half of them are science based, the other half are supernatural based. So you can have that science versus supernatural debate in these movies.
No, you absolutely can, and and I think all of us can identify with the outsider, the whole outsider theory of why these films mean so much to all of us goth kids.
Yeah, like I said, I grew up on them. I love the monsters growing up, and it's just I think they always have a place in history, despite being parodied to no end, like Hotel Transylvania. Let's say.
And there's a place for that too. But let's not forget the serious versions.
Right. So, Sam, how did you get to know Elvira? How did you come to doing her movie?
So I'll try to make this as short as I can. Okay, I desperately I wanted to meet Vincent Price, of course.
Mm.
I was such a fan of his and seeing Pit and the Pendulum. When I was in junior high school, they gave us an assignment to learn a monologue. They were thinking like, Shakespeare, and I'm allergic to iambic pentameter. And I said, no, could I do Edgar Allan Poe? And the teacher said, yes. So I raced home. Now, this is the late 60s with no home video, nothing like that. But I had been recording audio on a reel-to-reel tape recorder off of my TV, just the soundtracks from horror movies, and I had Pit and the Pendulum on a little
Oh,
reel-to-reel tape. And so I went in and I transcribed Vincent Price's monologue from the end of Pit and the Pendulum. Do you know where you are, Bartolome? You are about to enter hell, the neverworld, the infernal region, the abode of the damned, the place of torment, Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor edge of destiny. Thus the condition of man, bound on an island from which he can never nor hope to escape, surrounded by the waiting pit of hell, which must destroy him finally.
thank
So
you. Good.
when I heard that Vincent Price was going to be
Mm.
in Atlanta, Georgia, which was a 4-hour drive from Asheville, North Carolina, where I was living, and he was going to be playing Fagin in a production of Oliver. I held a gun to my mother's head and said, "You are driving me to Atlanta. I am going to see this show and I'm going to meet Vincent Price." And we did. And I went to the stage door after. I came equipped with a flyer. I had booked, since the age of 12, I had been booking Saturday morning kiddie matinees at my dad's theaters, which were all horror all the time. And I had done a Vincent Price retrospective of all the Corman Edgar Allan Poe movies from
Mhm.
House of Usher on down. And I had designed this little flyer, cut and paste out of press books. And so I brought this flyer to show him to prove that I had booked this series of his films, which he was very impressed. And then when he learned my name was Sam Irvin, he immediately went, "Oh, you must be related to Senator Sam Irvin because he's from North Carolina too." Now, Senator Sam Irvin back in those days was a very famous Democrat senator who'd been in office for decades and ended up being head of the Watergate Committee. Um, so my name, it was memorable to him.
Mhm.
And of course, the senator spelled Ervin, mine's Irvin, but it's pronounced the same. Okay, but then the third thing I did was I recited the monologue for Pit and the Pendulum, which completely blew him away. And the other fans in line applauded. And so that, between those three things, I made an impression, a big impression. So flash forward to 1974. I'm in London interviewing all these Hammer Film people and whatnot. I spent the day with Christopher Lee on the set of The Man with the Golden Gun. I got back to my hotel that night, and you would think that would be enough for a fanboy for one day. Nope. I decided to go see Diana Rigg on the West End, starring in Pygmalion on stage, and she was playing the lead, Eliza Doolittle, the play that, of course, became the musical My Fair Lady.
Mhm.
And I sit down in the theater and I'm hoping to go to the stage door afterwards and meet her and try to get an interview, blah, blah, blah. I sit down in the theater and I hear this familiar laugh behind me. I turn around, it's Vincent Price. And before I can open my mouth, he says, "Sam, what are you doing here?" And he remembered my name. And I told him I wanted to meet Diana Rigg, and he said, "Well, you're coming back with us after the play." And he took me backstage and introduced me to Diana Rigg, and then wound me up like his little performing monkey to recite the monologue from Bit and the Pendulum for Diana Rigg. Okay, so you'd think I would get enough mileage out of that monologue, but no, you would be wrong. I had one more chapter to go. And decades later, after Vincent had passed away, by the way, I became really, really close friends with him the rest of his life. And Cassandra Peterson was also friends with him
Mhm.
when he was alive. Um, but Cassandra had seen my first film, Guilty as Charged, and really liked it. And she invited me to come up to her house to be interviewed to direct her second Elvira film. And I get up there and she hands me the script, Elvira's Haunted Hills. And she goes, "Now, Sam, this is a spoof of the Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe movies like Pit and the Pendulum. Are you familiar with those?" I just started right in on the monologue. "Do you know where you are?" And she looked at me like I was crazy, just cocking her head more and more as I went through the thing. And as soon as I was done, she pointed to me and said, "You're hired." And that's honestly how I got to direct Elvira's Haunted Tales. It was that monologue that I learned
Wow.
in junior high school and had performed for Vincent Price, Diana Rigg. It's crazy, but that's how. I mean, it's just, I can't even believe it myself. No one no one would really believe it, but that's the truth.
That's amazing. I've had a great opportunity to talk to other people like yourself. That one guy just called up Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi, and he goes, "Hey, I'm making a movie. You want to be part of it?" And they go, "Yes."
Yeah, I mean, things like that don't seem to happen as
No.
much these days. For some reason, it was a little easier for crazy stuff like that to have happened back in the good old days.
Yeah, it's funny just to hear all the stories. I'm just going, I want their numbers. I'd like to be able to talk to them too, but as a fanboy, I probably wouldn't be able to, and at this point, but
Oh, no, they're so everybody's so buffered now with publicists and agents and everything. I mean, even
Mhm.
when you go to conventions and stuff, it's very limited of what you're allowed to do, and they kind of want to move you along.
Yep.
I think it's so funny when you get the professional photographs done. I call them drive-by shootings because the instructions are usually you can't talk to them, you have to hit your mark, and as soon as the camera flashes, you have to exit out, and you're just like, what? But yeah, so it's interesting. But you have these beautiful photographs standing next to your best friend who you haven't been allowed to even have eye contact with.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And doing the show and doing the independent horror movies now is too. And we're having a table at Days of the Dead here in November next
Uh,
month in Chicago. So, I'm getting to know some of these people a little bit better and getting their contacts and just treating them like people. And that's all they want. They don't
it's all,
want. Yeah,
if you
I
can
can
get
show
them,
them.
if you
Yeah,
can get them in a casual situation, then it's all great.
yeah.
But it's just getting to that place is not the easiest.
Oh, for sure, for sure. All right, well, Sam, let's get into some of these wrap up questions. You've been great so far, but outside of Universal Hammer Horror,
Yep.
what's your favorite scary movie?
Well, probably the scariest movie when I was young was Black Sabbath, the Mario Bava film
Mm-hmm.
that had Karloff. It was three tales, and Karloff sort of introduced them. But then he played the vampire in the family of the Vertalock in the last tale, and I think it's the greatest Karloff performance of his later career. It was so spooky and so horrifying, and that first tale with the dead witch, and oh my god, that film just creeps me out. Even when I see it today, it sends chills down my spine. So that one is definitely a scary one. um, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably my favorite of the really really ones that scared me.
Yeah, and I know probably your answer is gonna be for this next one, but practical or CGI?
Oh, practical, 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 practical. Oh my God, have you seen The Substance? Oh, I want to just applaud this French woman who directed and wrote The Substance with Demi Moore.
Mm-hmm.
It's all practical effects, and it's just amazing. If you haven't seen it, you have to go. And it's almost 3 hours long. It's you just think, oh my God, this how could this possibly be as good as people are saying? It's as good as people are saying. It's unbelievable. It's got everything from Cronenberg to David Lynch to John Carpenter's The Thing. And you know how John Carpenter's The Thing is all practical
Yep.
effects, just horrific stuff going on. That kind of stuff happens in this movie. You've got to see it if you haven't seen it.
I probably haven't seen it in a while. I'll put
No,
it
no,
on my
no.
list.
It opened like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Oh,
It's
really?
it's called The Substance. Yes.
Okay, I thought it
Oh
was
my
something else then. Okay,
if you have not heard about this, you've
no.
got to go out and try to catch it while it's still in the theaters. It is just
Hmm.
mind blowing, mind blowing. I just visited Cassandra Peterson because she lives in Portland, Oregon now, and I dragged her to the theater, and she was blown away. Couldn't believe it. And no, I mean, it's not just me. You go online and look it up, and you will
Yeah.
see everybody who's been seeing it is just like, whoa, this is like the best picture of the year. And as far as horror films go, it's just unbelievable. It's so gory, so creepy, so out there. Oh man, you got to see it.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to hear because I was envisioning the way mainstream was going that they'd go all CGI and then eventually people would go, wait a minute, let's do something in the old style.
Yeah. Well, this director, and forgive me because I can't remember her name. I wasn't familiar with her before this film. She's French, and that may have a lot to do with it because she's not, following the Hollywood formula.
Right.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that most of the film was shot in France, although it's totally in English and it looks like it takes place in America. But I believe it's a French film. Um, and and you can really tell this did not come from Hollywood.
And that's what I like to hear because I like that the indie people are keeping it alive.
Yes. No, it's something else.
Yeah. It's Corlia. I don't know how to say her last name. My producer just put it in the chat for us.
Okay, good. Yes, I'm honestly, I don't know how to pronounce her name either, but I'm incredibly impressed. And I want to see her. She has an earlier film that I hear is really good as well, called Revenge, and I'm looking forward to. Oh,
Okay, yeah, that poster looks familiar to me. I just looked it up.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't even hint at what you're about to see. I mean, your jaw will be on the just rolling down the theater. I mean, it's like, wow. I was not prepared for that movie. Woo!
Okay, thank you for the suggestion. I can't wait to see it now.
And last year,
Really?
my favorite movie was Godzilla -1, and I'm not a Godzilla fan. I always thought they were silly when I was a kid. I thought it was just a silly guy in a suit stomping on,
Mhm.
model buildings. I could never get into it as a kid. And this Godzilla movie, oh my Lord, it blew me away. I saw it 5 times in the theater, including the black and white version that they came back with.
Oh,
Uh, but again, it was because it was a human story essentially, and had true emotion to it, and it brought me to tears every time I saw it. I just think it's an incredible film.
yeah, yeah. It's fantastic. I have always loved Godzilla. I never stopped liking Godzilla, so that's my alley there.
Great.
All right. So Sam, if you could work in any existing IP or franchise, what would it be?
Oh wow. That is a really good question. Wow. Um, there's not a lot of franchises that I'm loving. It's funny. I mean, if I could, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd love to do, one of the Universal standalones and try to do something like Guillermo did with Shape of
Mhm.
Water. I mean, that would be, but that's not exactly the kind of franchise you're talking about. I don't think, where it's a continuing
Oh,
character or
it could
whatever.
be yeah. If you said you wanted to make the next quarter mass, for example, you can say
Yeah,
that. But
yeah.
it just
I mean, I would love to do, I'd love to do my own Frankenstein film. That would be the ultimate. I'm also a huge James Bond guy. I'd love to get my hands on a James Bond movie. Woo, that'd be good. But they would never let me do what I wanted to do. I would take it right back to the 60s, and I'd have it politically incorrect, and I'd have him screwing around with every woman he could get his hands on, and maybe a few men, and and smoking cigarettes, and it would be crazy. Um, but yeah, that's probably those two things: Frankenstein and Bond.
that's awesome. Like so, I love hearing that. I'd love to do a Nightmare on Elm Street. Quite honestly,
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
my pitch is that I would make him a sleep paralysis
Oh,
demon and have him come back through that.
nice. That would be very interesting. That would be really great.
So, all right. So, Sam, any advice for people getting into the field, whether it's writing books, directing, any of the sort?
Well, the advice I give to any person trying to get into it is, it's so competitive. It's such a tough industry, you have to really be determined and really have a thick skin, because you're going to get a lot of rejection, a lot of heart, soul crushing moments of things not happening. And you've got to just be able to push through and stay at it no matter what. When I hear people say, oh, I think I'm going to come to Hollywood for a couple years and give it a try, and if it doesn't work out, then I'm going to go back to get a real job at home, I tell them, just stay there. If that's your attitude, you're never going to make it. You've got to come out here, and you might have to do other types of jobs, waiting on tables or whatever it is, to pay the bills, but you're just going to keep plugging away at it and never give up. I mean, I'm a director for life. I'm a writer for life, and that will never change till the day I die.
Right. Awesome. So you ready for your random trivia question?
Yes. Oh God, I'm terrified. I know I'm not going to know the answer. You're going to stump me.
All right. What was the name of the cat in Pet Sematary?
Oh my God, I have no clue. That's way too new for me. And so yeah, no, you stumped me.
All right. Church.
Damn it. What's that?
Church was his name.
Oh, Church. Okay, sorry. Oh God, yeah. No, maybe if it was a question about one of the Frankenstein films or whatever, I could have gone there. But man, that's a tough one.
Oh.
All right, so I get to ask you one, and
Yes.
this is something I was just writing about online. So maybe you'll know the answer because you saw my post. But for the Young Frankenstein poster, originally, and if you have the paperback novelization, you might know this. On the side of the mountain, that artwork that was on the poster, on the side of the mountain, there was something that they had to remove, and it ended up not being on any of the posters. So it's only on the paperback novelization and some promotional T-shirts that they gave away right in the beginning. And it was a corporate logo of something. What was it on the side of the mountain that had to be removed from the Young Frankenstein poster?
Oh man.
The McDonald's Golden Arches.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, that sounds like something Mel Brooks would do.
I know, isn't it? It's so hilarious. It's so hilarious. And you look, it's right there on the paperback book, and I've managed to find one of the original T-shirts that they gave away at the time, and it's right on there. And there's also this is really obscure, but the monster on those early versions,
Yeah.
he has a bottle cap button on his lapel, and the original was a Moxie soda, which is an obscure soda that is very popular in New England. It has the logo on there, and they had to remove that as well. And you'll see they kept the button as a bottle cap button on his lapel, and they just put a smiley face on it instead. So that's what you'll see on the poster.
Wow. Such a great movie, though.
Oh my God, it's so great. So great. It's one of my very favorites. I mean, when it comes to comedies, it's that and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein are my two. Well, and Elvira's Haunted Hills, of course.
Of course.
But in fact, I actually, when I talk about Elvira's Haunted Hills, I really say it is our love letter to Vincent Price, Roger Corman movies, in the same way that Young Frankenstein is Mel Brooks' love letter to the Universal Frankenstein movies.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we thought of it.
Yeah. I think my producer would correct me if I'm wrong, but we do another podcast where we review horror movies and stuff that we've been doing this is our third season. I think maybe our second or third episode was all Vincent Price, Roger Corman movies.
Oh, yes. So they're just all so great. I love them so much.
And my producer watched like all 7 versions of Black Cat.
Wow. That's a dedication right there for you.
Yeah. But we, like I said, we crave and eat up all horror, all generations of it. So
that's great. It's really, really great. We're all monster geeks, and I wear the badge proudly.
Some of us wear the monsters on their sleeves.
Yeah, there you go. Very good. That's
So,
awesome.
all right, Sam. So before we go, where can people find you, follow you, and learn everything about your upcoming works?
Yes, I am on Facebook. That's the place you really want to go because I tend to write long text in my posts. And I'm also on Instagram, but I always have to edit down the text to fit on the guidelines for Instagram. But I'm on both. On Facebook, I'm Sam Irvin, Irvin. On Instagram, I'm Sam underscore Irvin underscore director, and that's where you can find me. And I do engage quite a lot with my followers. My followers have given me they've chosen a name uh, and for themselves, and it's sandwiches, and
Mm.
witches spelled like Witches. So my followers are sandwiches, which I think is hilarious. My favorite of those follower names is Benedict Cumberbatch, the Cumber Bitches. so, so mine rhymes with that, so I'm happy.
There
Um,
you go.
and my books are all available on Amazon in hardback, paperback, audiobook, and ebook. And the audiobooks are great because I have a lot of guest stars that come on there. The interviews, anybody who's still alive, I got them to come in and re-record their answers. The forward, like in on Elvira, Cassandra Peterson reads her forward in this. On the Frankenstein book, of course, Anne Rice passed away, but I got
Mm.
Juliette Mills to read hers. And Guillermo del Toro was off shooting his Frankenstein movie in Scotland. So we got Doug Jones, who's the
Oh,
infamous man in Shape of
yeah.
Water, to come in and read for him. And so anyway, they're pretty cool audiobooks as well. But you got to get the print editions for all the photos. And so I'm excited about that. I did also a novel called Orbgasm. It's an erotic. What do an erotic pulp sci-fi satiricon, and it's pretty fun, and it's got a lot of Bride of Frankenstein. It's got all kinds of horror film references in here, and I did that during COVID. It was really fun, and then I also did this crazy book. It's a parody of those little golden books.
Yeah.
So just a little illustrated storybook, and with all these amazing cartoons. And it's called Sam's Toilet Paper Caper, and it's my trials and tribulations of trying to find toilet paper during the toilet paper shortage. And I hear that there's another one happening right now because of the fears of shipping shortages or whatever. So
Yep.
it's even timely at the moment. But we cast Peter Lorre as the grocery store clerk, and
Nice.
and so there's a little film noir drawing. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is that I decided to do another one of these little storybook parodies that's going to be coming out at the end of November, and I haven't announced it yet. And I'm
Oh,
not. I'm only going to hint about it at this point, but it involves horror, Frankenstein, superheroes, supervillains. Uh, it's got it all, and that Young Frankenstein poster is going to figure into things. That's why I've been studying up on that McDonald's on the hillside and everything else. So anyway, it's going to be epic, and I'm really excited about that coming out. So look for a new book for me at the end of November, early December, just in time for Christmas,
there
for,
you go.
for holiday buying. In fact, I'm recording the audiobook of it on Friday, so there'll be an audiobook out.
Ooh, that's awesome. Can't wait. All right. Well, thank you, Sam, for joining us on this conversation in the void. And everyone, you know us, follow us on all social media at Pod Out at Night. And remember, if you're watching this later date, we do have 2 episodes of this show a week for October and 2 episodes of our podcast every week for October as well. So make sure to check it out. We'll see you next time. Don't get lost in the void. Good night.
Thanks for having me.